Summer in 1943. The air above Kursk shimmered like heated glass, a battlefield waiting to ignite. The pines stood motionless, tall and breathless, as if afraid to disturb the calm before the storm. Captain Mikhail Volkov crouched beneath one, his hands pressed into the soil. It was warm, too warm. He could smell oil on the wind, the faint perfume of death not yet born. Behind him, his men whispered, their breath clouding faintly in the dawn chill. 100 hearts beat together like a drum muffled by dirt. Somewhere ahead, the German lines waited, neat and silent. Volkov wiped sweat from his brow, his eyes the color of tarnished iron. He had been at war for 3 years, long enough to forget what silence without danger sounded like. His orders were simple: scout the enemy armor movements, report, and retreat. But simplicity was a luxury the Eastern Front had long buried. The earth here was unpredictable, alive, shifting beneath men as if remembering who had bled on it yesterday. He glanced over his shoulder. Sergeant Viktor Orlov, the men called him the Ghost, was adjusting the scope of his rifle, his movements patient, almost tender. His left ear was gone, shorn off by shrapnel months ago, yet he heard everything. The flutter of wings, the crack of ice, the difference between wind and breath. Orlov gave a short nod. That was all they needed to move. They slipped forward through the trees, the forest swallowing them. Volkov had once loved trees. As a boy, he climbed birches outside his village to watch the trains pass. Now he saw trunks as cover, branches as camouflage, roots as graves. The forest of iron hearts, the men called it. A place that devoured bullets, bodies, and memories alike. The first sign of the enemy came not as sound but scent, a blend of fuel, grease, and men who'd been too long in leather and smoke. Volkov signaled halt. They knelt in the undergrowth. Ahead, through the haze of morning, the dark hulls of German tanks gleamed like beetles. A whole division, maybe more, their guns yawning toward the horizon. And beside them, soldiers smoked and joked as if the world were not ending. Volkov's radio crackled softly. Static whispered, then died. The line to headquarters was gone again. Typical. He scribbled quick notes in a weathered pad. 30 tanks, movement south. Air support probable. His pencil snapped. He smiled faintly, as if the war itself had a sense of humor. A mosquito landed on his cheek. He let it feed. Pain was proof of life, and he'd learned not to swat away reminders. Behind him, Private Yura Petrenko fumbled his canteen, spilling water over his boots. The boy was 18, fresh from Odessa, his hands still soft enough to bruise. Volkov turned, expression sharp but not cruel. "Yura," he whispered. "The forest listens. Don't give it something to talk about." The men chuckled silently, a ripple of nerves disguised as humor. Even Orlov's mouth twitched. Humor, Volkov knew, was the cheapest armor and the one most easily pierced. He motioned them onward. Step by step, they approached the clearing. The sun rose higher, sharpening shadows into blades. And then, a flicker of white ahead. Volkov froze. Through his binoculars, he saw a makeshift pole sticking from the ground. At its tip fluttered a white scrap of cloth. A flag, but no movement. No figures, only stillness. His gut tightened. He signaled Orlov to flank left, 2 others to the right. They moved like smoke, the grass bending and releasing behind them. Volkov advanced alone, rifle raised. The cloth shifted in a small breeze. He could see now it was tied to a bayonet, thrust deep into the soil. Something was wrong with the angle. He reached the clearing's edge and stopped. The flag wasn't held by any man. It was clenched in the rigid fist of a corpse. The soldier's face was unrecognizable, blackened, frozen in mid-reach. A minefield surrounded him, half hidden by grass. The bayonet had been driven into his hand to make him appear alive from afar. Volkov exhaled slowly. "Ingenious devils," he muttered. Orlov emerged beside him, scanning the horizon. "A message," he said flatly. Volkov nodded. "Yes." And a warning. The sky rumbled faintly, the low growl of distant engines. They turned their eyes eastward. German planes. The forest began to hum, leaves trembling as the sound grew. Volkov pressed a finger to his lips. Down! The world erupted. Fire tore the treeline apart. Soil exploded in fountains. Men hit the ground, some not fast enough. The air filled with bark, smoke, and screams swallowed by thunder. Volkov's ears rang. He crawled to Yura, who lay stunned, staring at his own blood as if it belonged to someone else. Volkov dragged him behind a log. "Stay with me," he shouted over the roar, though the boy couldn't hear. The bombing passed as suddenly as it began. Silence returned, broken only by the creak of settling trees. The air smelled of cordite and burnt pine. Half the squad was gone. Orlov coughed, his face streaked with soot but alive. He spat into the dirt. They knew we were here. Volkov's jaw tightened, which means someone told them. He scanned the survivors, faces ghostly in the drifting smoke. Betrayal, the most silent weapon of all. The men avoided his gaze, their fear heavier than the air. They regrouped at the edge of a shallow trench. The boy, Yura, trembled as Volkov tied a strip of cloth around his arm. "You did well," the captain said. It was a lie, but lies were sometimes mercy in uniform. Orlov adjusted his rifle, eyes narrowed. "If they're expecting scouts, they'll move tonight." Volkov nodded, staring at the pale sky now streaked with smoke. Then we moved faster. As they prepared to retreat through the forest, Elena Morozova appeared, trudging through the wreckage. Her white medic's band was stained brown. She carried a satchel that clinked softly, morphine, bandages, letters. Always letters. She crouched beside the wounded, her hands steady, her voice low. "You're lucky," she told one man whose leg was gone. "The forest only took one piece of you. It usually takes everything." Volkov watched her work. She looked too gentle for this place, yet her eyes held something harder than iron. "Why are you here?" he asked quietly. She didn't look up. "Because no one else will write their names when they die." He said nothing. Around them, smoke drifted like fog. The forest groaned, alive with pain. When the last man was bandaged, they moved again, deeper into the trees. The sun had dulled to a copper disk. Insects whined. Somewhere behind them, the German engines roared to life. Volkov paused, looking back toward the clearing. The white flag still fluttered on the corpse's hand, stubborn and absurd. It looked almost peaceful now, waving farewell to no one. He turned away. "We keep going," he ordered. Orlov gave a single nod. "And if they're waiting again?" Volkov's voice was calm, almost serene. "Then the forest will decide which of us it wants more." As the men disappeared into the darkness, the wind rose, carrying with it the faintest sound, metal scraping metal, far off and rhythmic. It wasn't the tanks. It was something else. The forest was whispering again, and this time it sounded like laughter. Winter 1943 came crawling like an old wolf, hungry, patient, and silent. The trees of Belarus were stripped to bone, their black skeletons clawing the gray sky. Somewhere in that forest, Lieutenant Anya Petrov knelt over a frozen creek, washing her hands in water so cold it felt like knives. Blood spiraled out from her fingers, bright red against the ice. She watched it swirl for a moment, then rub it away with snow. There could be no traces. Not here. Not now. Behind her, 6 partisans crouched in a half-circle around the carcass of a horse they had dragged from the road. They were hungry enough to eat it, but tonight it wasn't food, it was bait. They were setting a trap for a German patrol rumored to pass through before dawn. "Wire the saddle," Anya whispered. Her voice was low, steady, not meant to carry. The youngest fighter, Kolya, barely 17, obeyed. His fingers shook as he tied the detonator cord beneath the saddle strap. Anya placed her gloved hand on his shoulder to still him. "If your hands tremble, it's the cold, never the fear. Understand?" Kolya nodded quickly. "Yes, comrade lieutenant." Her lips twitched. "Good. Then make the cold afraid of you." In the distance, an owl called once long and hollow. The sound rippled through the branches like a signal. The men froze, every breath suspended. Anya listened. Her hearing had grown sharper than sight in the months of hiding. The faint hum of engines drifted through the forest. Trucks. German. She motioned her group into the trees. They vanished like smoke. Snow began to fall again, light as ash. The convoy came minutes later. 2 trucks, headlights dimmed, soldiers hunched in the back like statues. They spoke in tired German, voices muffled by scarves. When a lead truck stopped near the dead horse, one soldier jumped down. He prodded the body with his rifle. Another laughed, saying something about Russian scavengers. The sound was still hanging in the air when the saddle exploded. The forest lit in a single white flash. Echoes ran for miles. Crows burst from the treetops. The second truck skidded sideways, its engine screaming, then went silent. Anya and her team were already moving. They fired only twice, once for precision, once for warning. When the echo faded, only the wind answered. The partisans moved through the wreckage quickly, stripping maps, bullets, rations. Kolya stared at a fallen soldier who looked no older than himself. The boy's blue eyes were open to the sky. Anya saw his hesitation and said softly, "Don't look at the face. Look at the boots. The boots walk toward your village or away from it. That's the only choice left in this war." Kolya swallowed hard and nodded. By dawn, they were gone again, back into the woods, into the frozen veins of their land. The Germans would find nothing but blood on snow and tire tracks that led nowhere. Far west of them, in a heated bunker lined with maps, Otto Reinhardt, a German intelligence officer, studied the latest report. He was a man of angles, sharp nose, square jaw, eyes pale as steel filings. His uniform was spotless, his patience less so. He had been chasing these wolves, as they were called, for 7 months. He read the casualty notes aloud, almost admiringly. 18 men killed by 6. No survivors. Efficient. His aide waited in silence. Reinhardt tapped the map where the attack had occurred. Here, near Vitebsk again. Always the forest. Always the same pattern. He smiled thinly. You know, Meyer, they say the Russians have witches in these woods. But I think this one, this Anya Petrov, is no witch. She's an artist. The aide hesitated. Shall we send more troops, sir? Reinhardt looked up. Troops? No. Wolves don't fear sheep. We send hunters. Outside the bunker, snow fell over the vast emptiness of the front. Wolves howled somewhere beyond the wire. To some men it was just noise. To Reinhardt, it was a song of defiance. Days later, deep in the forest, Anya's group reached their camp. A collection of dugouts hidden under pine boughs. Smoke funneled through logs so thin it vanished before it reached the sky. The fire crackled softly as men thawed their hands. They had lost one fighter that night. No one spoke his name. The living could not afford the weight of the dead. Anya sat apart, sharpening her knife on a whetstone. The sound, slow, deliberate, was almost soothing. She thought of the German officer she'd killed last spring. He had begged in broken Russian, promised her food, even safety. She remembered only his breath turning white in the air as she pulled the trigger. Guilt was a language she'd unlearned. Kolya approached hesitantly. "Comrade Lieutenant," he said, holding out a small photograph. It was bent, stained by smoke. A woman with a baby. It was in the truck. Should we burn it? Anya stared at it. The woman smiled softly, unaware of war. "Keep it," she said at last. "Someone has to remember who they were." Kolya frowned. Even the enemy? Anya's eyes met his. Especially the enemy. It's how we remember what side we're on. That night, snow covered their tracks again. Reinhardt's men moved through the same forest, guided by dogs and hatred. They found nothing. Only empty fires, old prints, and once a single carved wolf's head nailed to a tree. Under it, a note in German. "Not all beasts walk on 4 legs." Reinhardt tore it down, his jaw tight. "Good," he said. "Now I know she speaks my language." The pursuit became a ritual of shadows. For every trap Reinhardt set, Anya's partisans vanished and struck elsewhere. He began to dream of her, a ghost woman moving through birches, leaving footsteps that turned into paw prints. His subordinates whispered that he was cursed. He began to believe them. By February, supplies ran thin. The partisans lived on bark tea and courage. Frostbite gnawed at fingers. Kolya's cough worsened. Yet when the Germans raided nearby villages, they struck back harder, burning bridges, cutting rails, derailing trains that carried prisoners instead of weapons. The war was no longer about orders. It was about existence. One evening, as they returned from an ambush, they found their camp raided. Smoke still rose from the wreckage. 2 men were gone. In the ashes lay Elena Morozova's satchel. How had it reached here? Anya picked it up and froze. Inside was a bloodied letter signed Captain Mikhail Volkov. The forest seemed to hold its breath. She read the letter aloud by moonlight. Volkov's words were faint but deliberate. If this finds you, we are still fighting. South of Smolensk. They call us wolves now. I wonder if they know how right they are. Anya's hand trembled slightly as she folded it. Volkov. The name stirred something distant. He had trained her years ago, back when orders still came from offices instead of ghosts. Kolya stepped closer. Is he alive? Anya stared into the dark, where the pines leaned close like listeners. If he is, the forest will protect him. Snow began to fall again, thicker this time, muffling the world. The silence grew heavy, almost sacred. Somewhere, far away, a wolf howled, and another answered. Reinhardt, crouched by his campfire miles north, heard it too. He smiled faintly. So the legends breathe, he whispered. He took a pen from his pocket and began writing in his journal. They move like smoke and vanish like prayers. We hunt them with maps, but they fight with memory. Each ambush feels personal, as if she knows what we fear most. Not death, but being forgotten. He closed the book and looked into the flames. Tomorrow, he murmured, we end this. But the forest had other plans. As dawn crept in, one of his soldiers stumbled into camp. Eyes wide, face pale as chalk. Sir, he gasped. The supply truck's gone. Vanished. Reinhardt rose slowly, disbelief turning to fury. Vanished. The soldier nodded. Not even tracks left, sir. It's as if they flew. Reinhardt turned toward the trees. The snow shifted in a sudden gust, whispering against his coat. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, shadows among shadows. A woman's silhouette, rifle in hand, watching from the ridge. Then it was gone. He exhaled, breath curling like smoke. So be it, he said softly. If they're wolves, then I'll feed them one last hunt. The forest answered with silence. Far away, Anya watched the distant glow of burning trucks through her binoculars. Her breath fogged the lens. Around her, her fighters huddled, exhausted but alive. She lowered the glass, whispering to no one in particular, we don't need to win every battle. Only the ones they remember. Kolya glanced at her. And if they never remember? Anya smiled faintly. Then the forest will. The wind carried the scent of smoke and pine through the air. And it was a hint of something else, metal, ash, and destiny. The wolves were still moving, still unseen, still feared. But somewhere in the dark, the hunter was learning to think like them. February 1944 laid its cold hand across Smolensk like a pallbearer's glove. The snow had long stopped falling, yet it still ruled everything. The roads, the breath, the hearts. Captain Mikhail Volkov limped through what was left of a farmhouse, his coat torn, his right hand bound in a strip of blood-soaked linen. The ceiling was gone, the walls cracked open like ribs, and through them came the moan of wind. It was here he decided he would write the letters. He sat at a broken table, pulling from his pocket a handful of envelopes, wrinkled, smudged, stained by months of sweat and rain. Each bore a name, half of them belonging to men who no longer answered when called. He struck a match and watched the flame tremble. Its small defiance was almost beautiful. Then he began to write. The first was for Private Yura Petrenko, who had once joked that the forest mosquitoes were tougher than German bullets. Your mother must never know you were afraid, Volkov murmured as he pressed his pencil to paper. She will believe you laughed until the end. The graphite broke mid-sentence. He stared at the word laughed, as if it were a lie too heavy to finish. Across the room, Nurse Elena Morozova tightened a bandage on a soldier whose chest barely rose. She had run out of morphine 2 days ago, yet her voice carried gentleness like medicine. "You'll see spring again," she whispered, though outside the world was locked in permanent winter. When she caught Volkov's eyes, she nodded once. An unspoken exchange between two people too tired for hope but unwilling to surrender it. At dusk, the horizon lit with distant flashes. The front was moving again, or perhaps collapsing. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. Volkov took out a small tin box from his satchel, the kind that once held sweets. Inside were 20 letters, folded tight. Some were to mothers, some to wives, one to a child he'd never met. They were promises no one could deliver. He handed the box to Elena. "If we fall back, burn these," he said. She frowned. "They deserve to be read. They deserve to be buried," he answered. "Better by fire than by snow." That night, he dreamed of his village, a place that probably no longer existed. His father chopping wood, his mother baking bread, the air thick with the smell of pine smoke and peace. He awoke to find a roof glowing faintly. It wasn't dawn, it was fire. The Germans were close again. He roused his men, voices low and urgent. "We move north," he said. "Smolensk won't hold." They gathered what they could, stepping over the sleeping, the dying, and the already dead. Outside, snowflakes turned orange in the firelight. As they fled into the woods, Elena stumbled, clutching the tin box to her chest. A shell burst nearby, hurling both of them into the snow. When Volkov rose, his ears ringing, she was still on the ground, her coat torn open. She wasn't bleeding badly, but her breath came fast and shallow. He reached for the box. She shook her head. "No," she gasped. "They'll need their words." He hesitated. Then he lifted her gently and carried her to the trees. Behind them, the farmhouse crumbled in a shower of sparks. By morning, the survivors found an abandoned rail depot and made camp in one of the freight cars. The place stank of rust and frozen wood. Volkov lit a lantern and saw that Elena was writing now, her gloved hand moving clumsily, the pencil scratching against paper. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Answering them," she said simply. "If their mothers ever find me, they'll have something to hold." Volkov almost smiled. "You're making ghosts speak." She didn't look up. "Someone has to." Outside, the snow began again. Each flake settled like a secret. 3 days later, the Germans surrounded the depot. The first shots came at dawn. The men returned fire, but they were too few, too broken. Volkov crawled through the smoke toward Elena's car. She sat by the window, still writing even as bullets punched through the walls. "Enough," he shouted. "We have to move." Her eyes met his, calm and fierce. "You said burn them if we fall. I'm not letting the snow bury their names." She held out the tin box. "Take it." He didn't want to. He wanted to throw it into the fire, to end this ritual of remembering. But her stare demanded obedience. He took it, tucking it under his coat. When the shooting stopped, the world was white again. The Germans had moved on, leaving behind bodies half covered by snow. Volkov crawled from the wreckage, dragging Elena's limp form. Her eyes were closed, her hair matted with frost. He laid her beside a tree and brushed snow from her face. She looked almost asleep. He opened the tin box. Inside, one new letter lay atop the rest, her handwriting delicate, slanted. He read it aloud, voice trembling. "To whoever finds this, we were not soldiers by choice. We were names trying not to be erased. If you read this, remember one thing. The snow covers everything but guilt." He folded it and placed it back inside. Then he stood, the wind clawing at his coat. He couldn't bury her. The ground was too hard. So he did the only thing left. He dug a shallow hollow in the snow, laid the tin box beside her, and covered them both until only the shape of her hand remained visible. When night fell, he walked north again alone. The forest whispered, the snow squeaked under his boots, and each step felt like walking on letters he could never send. Weeks later, far behind enemy lines, Anya Petrov found the abandoned depot. Her squad moved cautiously, rifles ready. She stepped in the freight car and saw the remnants of paper scattered like feathers. She picked up one, a half-burned page signed M. Volkov. She read it under her breath. "If they call us wolves, tell them we were only men who refused to kneel." Anya stared at the words for a long time. Snowflakes drifted through a hole in the roof, landing on the ink, blurring it but not erasing. Kolya entered behind her. "What is it?" he asked. "A letter," she said softly. "From the snow." He frowned. "From who?" She looked out toward the tree-line where the wind hissed through black branches. "Someone who's still alive," she whispered, though she didn't know if it was hope or fear that made her say it. She folded the page and slipped it into her coat pocket. Outside, the world was still endless white, but in her hand was proof that words could survive even when bodies could not. And somewhere, far to the west, a man limped through another forest, a tin box beneath his coat, and the snow, merciful for once, forgot to hide his tracks. April 1945. The forest that had once hidden them now burned behind them. Captain Mikhail Volkov limped through the smoke, his breath harsh, his boots leaving black prints on scorched snow. The air smelled of resin and gunpowder, a strange perfume of endings. Around him, what remained of his unit stumbled forward. 5 men who no longer looked like soldiers, only ghosts wearing uniforms. The Red Army was advancing on Berlin, but for Volkov, victory was a word that no longer fit inside his chest. He wanted silence, not triumph. They reached a ridge overlooking a valley where the ruins of a German village smoldered. Roofs had caved, chimneys jutted like broken teeth, and from somewhere in the rubble, a piano played 2 cracked notes before dying. Volkov raised his hand, signaling halt. Every motion now carried the weight of habit more than command. The men dropped to one knee, scanning the valley. Victor Orlov, the ghost, still carried his rifle like an extra limb. His eyes, always sharp, had grown quieter. He looked to Volkov. "Into the line?" Volkov nodded slowly. "Into something." A wind stirred the ashes around them, gray spirals dancing like spirits. They had marched from Smolensk to Berlin without knowing why they were still alive when better men had fallen. Perhaps survival itself had become their punishment. Down the slope, movement flickered. 3 German soldiers, armed but exhausted, picking through debris. Volkov motioned to flank. The others hesitated. Their war was nearly over, but instinct still ruled. They crept closer, weaving through burnt trees until they were near enough to smell the enemy's sweat and smoke. Then one of the Germans turned. He was young, too young to have killed anyone, too old to still believe he wouldn't have to. Their eyes met across the clearing. No one fired. A shout rang out from behind. Shots cracked. The forest exploded into chaos again. Volkov ducked, returning fire, feeling each bullet like a heartbeat. When it ended, 2 Germans lay still. The third had fled toward the woods. Orlov started after him, but Volkov stopped him with a gesture. Let him run. The forest had enough blood. The men lowered their rifles. Silence pressed down, heavy and final. From behind the ridge came another sound. Engines. Soviet tanks. The roar of home. Relief washed over the squad like weak sunlight. They had survived long enough to see the end. But Volkov didn't move toward the sound. He was staring at the tree-line, where a single figure emerged through the smoke. It was a German officer, alone, unarmed. He walked slowly, one hand raised. His uniform was tattered, his face streaked with soot, but the eyes, cold, intelligent, were unmistakable. Hans Kruger. Volkov remembered him from Smolensk, from the reports of the clean operations, from the day the snow turned red by the river. The man who believed order could cleanse cruelty. Kruger stopped a few meters away. "So," he said, voice hoarse, "you're the one they call the wolf." Volkov said nothing. The wind hissed through burning pines. Kruger glanced at the bodies on the ground. "We were not so different, you and I." Volkov's laugh was dry, without humor. "I buried too many to believe that." The German looked past him to the forest, as if trying to see the ghosts that lived there. "You fought for an idea. So did we. In the end, ideas starve." Volkov lowered his rifle, but didn't drop it. "Ideas don't starve," he said. "Men do." For a long moment, neither moved. The flames crackled around them, an orange halo of ruin. Then Kruger reached into his coat and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper. He tossed it gently at Volkov's feet. "I found this near Smolensk," he said. A letter in a tin box. It had your name. Volkov froze. His hand trembled as he picked it up. The handwriting was Elena's, faded but still legible. If they call us wolves, tell them we only learned to bite because the world forgot to feed us. He closed his eyes. For a moment, the fire's heat felt like sunlight. When he opened them again, Kruger had stepped back, his weaponless hand spread. Take me prisoner, if you must. But know this, I envied you. You fought for memory. We fought for maps. Volkov stared at him, then lowered his rifle completely. There are no prisoners left, he said quietly. Only survivors. Kruger gave a small, broken smile. Then perhaps that's punishment enough. He turned and began walking toward the burning horizon, his figure swallowed by smoke until he vanished like a ghost, dissolving into its own legend. Orlov approached, rifle still ready. You let him go? Volkov didn't answer. He unfolded the letter again, the paper trembling in the wind. The words blurred as ash drifted down like black snow. Behind them, the tanks arrived, Soviet soldiers cheering, waving flags, shouting of victory. The war was ending, the continent bleeding toward silence. One of the younger soldiers ran up to Volkov, saluting clumsily. Comrade Captain, orders to advance into Berlin. Volkov looked at the boy, bright eyes, clean face, a future unscarred. Advance, he said, his voice steady. The wolves are done hunting. He watched them go, hundreds of boots thundering over the same soil that had buried thousands. He felt no triumph, only the vast emptiness that comes when purpose burns away. Orlov stood beside him, lowering his rifle. What now? Volkov turned to the forest. Now only smoke and memory. Now, he murmured, we learn to live like men again. But as he said it, he wasn't sure he still remembered how. The sun broke through the haze for a heartbeat, lighting the charred pines in gold. It looked almost like peace. Volkov unfolded the letter one last time, watching the edges crumble in his hands. The ink had smudged, but the final line was still clear. When the snow melts, remember us. He let the paper fall. The wind caught it, lifting it into the air, where it turned, spun, and disappeared into the rising light. Volkov stood there a moment longer, eyes closed, listening to the silence where once there had been screams. Somewhere far off, wolves howled, the last echo of a war that had finally run out of teeth.